Thank you very much. And again, thank you, Pascal, and thank you to the Tbilisi Regional Sustainable Development Forum and to fellow panelists. I'll try to be very brief and succinct. This is a very contested history, but in my reading of the history, the United States very clearly had the idea already back in the 1990s, but it really stretches to the Cold War origins in the 1940s, that if the United States could take some kind of political control, and especially a military presence in Eastern Europe and in Ukraine, this would be a dire blow to the power of the competitor, the Soviet Union, up until 1991, of course, and then to Russia afterwards. So in my understanding, Ukraine was already in the sights of American strategists back in the 1940s as a potential area to weaken the Soviet Union. And then after 1991, Ukraine was definitely viewed in strategic terms by the United States as a prize to be won, and thereby to weaken the big rival, Russia. And this was made very explicit in the writings of Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was a major strategist, of course, the key national security advisor to President Carter, but then in the 1990s, an extremely influential advisor in Washington. And in 1997, in his book, The Grand Chessboard, and in an important essay in Foreign Affairs magazine, Brzezinski laid out the vision of Ukraine becoming part of NATO, and thereby becoming a fundamental stepping stone of American power in Eurasia, and a fundamental loss of Russian power in the Eastern Mediterranean region. So the idea of this pivotal state, Ukraine, which means etymologically border, taking the border was viewed strategically by the United States. And of course, tragically, and I think completely avoidably, Ukraine became an open battleground and is now the site of an extraordinarily dangerous war. And that war was brought about partly by the coup in February 2014, which the United States actively backed, and by the policy of NATO enlargement. All of this, to my mind, shows the dangers of the great game played between two superpowers in a contested area. I'm sorry to say that the South Caucasus, in the American imagination, which doesn't know very much, doesn't have very much geographical sophistication in any event, but the South Caucasus has played a similar role in the American imagination as the soft underbelly of Russia. So if the United States can have its active presence in the South Caucasus, this is similar to the United States having its active presence in Ukraine. And pursuing that approach was carried out in the South Caucasus region in a way similar to the way that it was carried out in Ukraine. From the late 1940s onward, with the covert operations, there was engagement in the region. And then after 1991, with the series of color revolutions and US engagement, the idea came that Georgia would join NATO the same way that Ukraine would join NATO. And this, in my view, led to the war in 2008, but it was the US idea all along to make the region a contested zone. So this we see in many parts of the world. We see it in the Middle East also. We see it in East Asia. It's an extraordinarily dangerous game. It was already called 175 years ago the Great Game. It's not a game, and it does not serve the people of the regions that face the major powers contesting their region, not out of any concern for the region itself, but out of the competition between the great powers. Well, we've also known throughout history that there are solutions, political solutions, geographical solutions, the most important of which is neutrality of regions that are in between major powers. So the idea of states that are recognized as not in the ownership of any great power and not to be contested actively between the great powers is also part of geopolitical history for at least 2,000 years. And it has a very distinguished historical record when it's allowed to be achieved. My favorite example of this in the European context was the neutrality that was established in Austria in 1955, promoted by the Soviet Union to show that Austria could be a neutral state between NATO to its west and the Soviet military pact, the Warsaw Pact, to its east, and that by declaring itself neutral and not joining the alliance of either side, it could remain safe. And that decision was taken by the Austrians in 1955, together with the Soviet Union, on the basis that neutrality would lead to the withdrawal of the Soviet occupying troops in 1955. The deal was made. Neutrality was established as a state principle of Austria. The Soviet troops went home. And the fact is, Austria was never bothered again. It was recognized by both sides as valued in its neutrality. So all of this, that's one of many, many examples, but it's a highly successful example. The Soviets wanted it to be used as an example for a neutral Germany, which the United States never accepted. I think the Cold War could have ended in 1955 had the US accepted a neutral Germany. Instead, the US incorporated Western Germany into NATO, and the Cold War persisted until 1989. So we have some lessons of prudence to learn. In our world today, we have several great powers, the United States, Russia, China. I would argue India is a great power as well, as a third largest economy, a nuclear power, and the world's most populous nation. But in any event, we have major powers and contested areas. And my view is that the first order of priority for the world is to prevent a nuclear war between the major powers. And second, to prevent countries caught in the middle to be trapped into proxy conflicts. And it's in that context that I have recommended what I call spheres of security as opposed to spheres of influence. Spheres of influence say that a big country like Russia has the right to dominate the South Caucasus, something like that, or that the United States has the right to dominate the politics of Venezuela or Cuba. I completely disagree with that approach. But I do agree with the approach that Russia has the right not to have NATO in Ukraine or in Georgia. The United States has the right not to have Russian military bases in Mexico or Cuba or Canada. And China has the right not to have the United States arm Taiwan. That these are rights in a way that are basic to global security. Essentially, the major powers have the right not to have other major powers be threats to their own security on their borders. So I would like regions like the South Caucasus not to be competed for NATO, or Ukraine to absolutely be a neutral country, and for the major powers to respect the red lines of the other major powers, not to give them control over smaller countries, quite the opposite. They should be good neighbors. Smaller countries in regions like the South Caucasus, which are between many regional powers, should have autonomy, security, and neutrality, in my view. So that, in summary, is my thought on this. And I very much worry about European meddling in the South Caucasus, and by Europe, I mean the European Union. I think it's wholly inappropriate. It's playing a game that is extremely dangerous, way out of line with the European Union mission. The South Caucasus, in any event, is a part of Asia, not part of Europe geographically, south of the crest of the Grand Caucasus Mountains. We should not be playing geopolitical games. We should be getting on with well-being, peace, and economic development. So let me turn it back over to you, Pascal.